And like business owners, you could do the E2 visa if you have the treaty. You invest, 100K, 150K plus.
And now Portugal has a treaty, right?
Now
Thanks to
Portugal,
legislation.
exactly.
That's awesome news. And
A
you know,
lot
I
of
find,
Portuguese in Venezuela, Brazil.
yeah, because there's these Sephardic laws that are allowing them to obtain second nationalities, and with Venezuela, they can't get passports to travel, so they're looking for other nationalities for travel, and these avenues open up.
I think probably with money, and if you have a business in your home country, there's going to be more options. And then the less money you have, and if you don't have a business in your home country, whether it's the non-immigrant or the immigrant path, probably your options get narrowed. Would that be a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. If you have your own business and you're looking to invest or start a business in the US, you have more self-petition options. Other than that, like that you can essentially sponsor yourself, like with an L with your company or an E if you have the treaty. You can also do a TN, but H-1Bs, O's, and obviously L's and E's can be used this way too, but are employee visas, right? So that's for somebody that's going to work for somebody else. And when I say E's, I mean E2 employees, right? And
So
L1As
that
and
would be like an
L1Bs are
Italian
multinational.
company that wants to bring over other Italians to work at the business.
Exactly. So you don't always have to be an investor. And that's funny when I talk to clients who have a treaty nationality and they're like, oh, but I don't have capital to invest. I'm like, well, look at your chamber, your country's chamber of commerce in the US, look at job postings, because there are a lot of international companies that use the E2 programs, like Banco Santander. They have it's a Spanish bank. They have a bunch of E2 employees. So we often forget that there are employment options, not just as an investor on the E, but as an employee, and what those avenues would be to knock on doors.
That's something that we've thought about, like building a database of just E2 visa businesses, because essentially if you go to Sunbiz and the Florida website, you can see if it's owned by an Italian corporation, Spanish corporation, and there's a
Correct.
lot of companies that are the beneficial owner is not American. So I can imagine
Exactly.
how many, hundreds of thousands of potential E2 visa companies exist in the US.
The only trick is really advising the company that they've got to maintain their E2 nationality, because then what happens is one of your clients who's got all these E2 employees decides they want to get a green card, and then the whole E2 structure dies because they're no longer a treaty national. So you have to do some planning, some succession planning to make sure that unless you plan to retire all your employees, that you maintain the nationality to sustain the visas.
And how does it work of like the beneficial owner changes? Like Club Med, for example, they have their North American Caribbean headquarters here in Miami. It's now Chinese owned. I imagine there's still some French ownership, but they were bought out by a Chinese conglomerate. But I think they still have French E2s being sponsored. Like, is that
So
something that the State Department's looking into on companies, or if it's like traditionally, if this has been a French brand, it's okay and it can kind of fly?
I think with immigration, we hear about these outrageous, like, I don't know, cases. And you're like, never in a million years would that get approved. Well, under the letter of the law, it shouldn't, but that doesn't mean that some person somewhere didn't just approve it. So sometimes things, because, the red tape and a massive bureaucracy of our government can sometimes work in our favor. And that would be one of those instances. Although I'm sure they did some strategy planning where they moved everybody to some sort of a payroll company where there's still a French stake majority interest and did an amendment. I mean, I think there's probably some strategy there. Although there is the argument that when somebody's I-94 is still valid, not the visa itself, but the I-94, they can continue working and they're in status, right? So even if the E2 originally failed, that individual is not out of status or in violation of status.
It's been like 2 years.
The I-94 will be issued for 2 years.
Is that across the board for every status, or is that just the E2 status that it's for 2 years?
So every status is subject to a reciprocity table. And so the reciprocity table will say how long we will issue a visa for. And then in the statutes, we'll list, so under the Code of Federal Regulations will list the duration of the validity of the I-94 for each non-immigrant visa type.
Huh.
So it's determined by Congress that every time you come in on a B, you can get no more than 6 months. It's visa category that defines how long you'll be given on the I-94. It's the particular country's reciprocity agreements, treaties with the United States that you'll find on the reciprocity table. They'll tell you how long they'll issue the visa or the FOIL for, which is that stamp in the passport. So that's why like a tourist visa will be issued for 10 years. And then you'll come in and they only give you 6 months. The I-94 that they'll give you is pursuant to what Congress said the validity of that status can be. How long they'll give you the visa for in your passport depends on treaties and what the officer thinks, right? If they think you're a risk.
It could be shorter. You have you could potentially get an E2 visa for 5 years if you're from Italy, but they could give it for less.
Right. If your business doesn't look super strong and it's a startup, you'll often see them kind of treat it like an L and give just 1 year and say, come back and see us, when you're up and running.